40 years ago this week, one of the most shocking breaches of royal security took place when a man broke into Buckingham Palace and made his way into the Queen's bedroom as she slept. The Daily Mail's editor-at-large, Richard Kay, was one of the paper's news reporters covering the story. Can you believe it? He shares his extraordinary memories of that time.
On July the 9th, 1982, a man called Fagan clambered up the perimeter wall of Buckingham Palace. He didn't just do it once, he did it twice. The second time only came about after his arrest for the first offence. But what happened was he managed to shin up the outside wall, all 14 feet of it, climb over the top, which I think had barbed wire at the top, and then shinned up a drain pipe, got access to the palace through an open window and wandered around, helped himself to something to eat, and then after half an hour got bored and left and went out the same way again. Now, he did trigger alarms, but the police thought they were faulty. 2 and a bit weeks later, on July the 9th, he decided to do it all over again. It was the early hours. It was just after sunrise, so it was quite light at that time, and he more or less went the same route again, over the wall, up the drain pipe, and this time he managed to break into, or wandered into, the private apartments and found himself in the Queen's bedroom. What happened next, of course, is the stuff of history, because he plonked himself down on the Queen's bed. He was bleeding heavily. He'd cut his hand on an ashtray on a piece of broken glass. He'd also drunk half a bottle of wine by this stage, and the Queen naturally woke up and said memorably, "What on earth are you doing here?" Or words to that effect. I mean, a terrifying situation for Her Majesty, of course. She didn't know who this man was or what he possibly represented to her. To the Queen's intense anger, I think, barely controlled, she couldn't get through to anyone. She was dialing for an emergency number for assistance. The police or whoever was meant to answer the phone didn't respond. Nobody came. And eventually Fagan said he'd like a cigarette, and she said she'd go and get him some. And she went out and she saw her housemaid, Lizzie Andrews, who followed her back into the room and said, "What on earth are you doing in here, ma'am?" Or again, or worse to that effect. And the page, the butler who'd been walking the Queen's dogs for their early morning walk, also returned. Between the two of them, between the housemaid and the footman, they managed to extract Fagan from the Queen's bedroom. It was an astonishing breach of royal security, but of course it threw up all sorts of other questions, because we then discovered, and it became widely reported, that the Queen did not share a bed with Prince Philip, or at least not regularly, and she slept alone. So it wasn't just the physical invasion, but the invasion of her privacy too, that it's remembered for.
I thought that I did intrude, and I was a bit embarrassed by it. I mean, but that was the first time that I was actually stopped, was when I went into the Queen's room, you know. And I don't know where the room is. It's not like it's on the door. So, you know, I didn't mean to intrude into her room. You know, if I'd have been challenged before that, we could have said security was great, and he didn't get, you know, I didn't get very far.
I think it changed the Queen in the sense that she had to get used to a much more intensive and invasive form of police protection. Police suddenly were treating the security of individual senior members of the royal family much more seriously than they had. It meant that there were more police. The presence were always around her all the time, and they just weren't prepared to take risks. And I think that she found that upsetting, because it inevitably increased the barrier between her and the people. And one of the things the Queen likes to do is to let people see her whenever she can, when she's out and about, or when she was out and about a lot. And you know, it did cramp her style. Fagan was a rather disturbed young man. He was arrested and he was charged, but the charges which were involved breaking and entering and the theft of the wine which he drank, you know, were dropped, and he was sent to a secure unit for a while to be treated. He, of course, was fictionalized, the break-in in that last series of The Crown, in which the writers turned him into some sort of crusading campaigner for change. They presented this idea that he wanted to talk about his unemployment and the difficulties facing young people on the street. Nothing of the kind was true.
Thanks for watching. On Thursdays, don't forget to tune in to Palace Confidential, your weekly look at all things royal.